Good evening. I apologize that we're starting an hour later than normal today. Our son, Avi, is a senior in high school, one of the captains of the baseball team. And this was the last game, and they had a beautiful senior ceremony for the graduating seniors, and the captains were, of course, especially mentioned, and just wasn't going to miss that opportunity to be there for the senior ceremony for our youngest son. My God, soon to leave the nest. At any rate, it was a little bit last minute, and I apologize for that. There was so much rain here in Southern California that the baseball team had, I think 8 or 9 of the first 10 games were rained out. And then they were scrambling to reschedule, so this came together a little bit quickly. At any rate, I apologize for the late notice and for the 1 hour delay in starting tonight's class. Who's in the house? Let's light up the darkness. Welcoming Shandora. Stop skipping. Shandora in the Bronx, David in Indiana, in South Bend, Indiana, Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida, Peggy in Colorado, M.A. Rothman saying hello. Ryan says congrats to our son. Thank you. Also welcoming Aoife in Florida and Ella saying shalom. Okay. Fascinating daf today as we finish chapter 4 here in Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud, and open chapter 5. These are the laws of the suspected adulteress. Chapter 4 was about certain exceptions when the Sotah procedure, Sotah ritual just doesn't apply. As we saw, for example, a woman who is betrothed to a man, is considered married in the sense that if they want to part company, he has to give her a bill of divorce, a get. But because they are not yet actually married, right, she's still living in her family's house, and they've not started, they haven't stood under the chuppah and started to live together. They haven't fully married yet. So if he warns her not to seclude herself with a particular man in front of witnesses, and then she secludes herself, she does not drink the bitter water in order to prove that she is innocent, because the Sotah doesn't apply, the Sotah ritual doesn't apply to someone who is not technically a wife in the sense of being under the authority of her husband, meaning they're living together if they're betrothed. Likewise, a widow waiting her yavam. We had other examples of that here in chapter 4. Our daf is page 27. We pick it up at the very bottom of 26b. Shmuel says it is better that a man marry a woman, right? Yesterday we were starting to talk a little bit, how did we get on this particular subject, right? When we were talking about who might be excluded from the Sotah ritual. And we were talking about, for example, right at the end of yesterday's class, if a woman committed adultery, but she thinks maybe I didn't really commit adultery because she didn't have sex in the regular way, but she had a different kind of sex, does that count as adultery? And the answer was yes, that counts. So while we're talking about licentious behavior, the sages take not really a digression, but same topic, not necessarily about the Sotah ritual, for a few paragraphs, right? So says the sage Shmuel, it is better for a man to marry a woman whose suspected promiscuity, right? That she was a woman of easy virtue, right? She slept with men before she was married or while she was previously married. It is better for a man to marry a woman whose suspected promiscuity is publicly spoken of. How would it be better to marry someone like that? Better to marry her and not marry the daughter of a woman suspected of promiscuity. Right? Better to marry a woman known to be promiscuous than to marry her daughter. Why? According to Shmuel, as this woman, who is herself suspected of promiscuity, comes from seed of unflawed lineage. But that woman, the daughter of a woman suspected of promiscuity, comes from seed of flawed lineage, right? In other words, the woman who is suspected of being promiscuous, we have no reason to suspect that her mother was promiscuous. So there's no reason to suspect that this woman is a mamzer, that she is the product of an adulterous relationship and therefore prohibited for marriage to a Jew who's not himself a mamzer. So better to marry the one who herself is promiscuous than her daughter, because the daughter of a woman who is known to be promiscuous, well, who can tell who her father was? So maybe she was conceived in an adulterous relationship and it is prohibited to marry her. And Rabbi Yochanan says, right, he takes the opposite view from Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan says it is better that a man marry the daughter of a woman suspected of promiscuity and not marry a woman who herself is suspected of promiscuity, as this daughter maintains the presumptive status of virtuousness. But that woman, her mother, suspected of promiscuity, does not maintain the presumptive status of virtuousness. Very interesting. Right? So yesterday we were talking a little bit about how the behavior of parents can seriously damage their children, right? The consequences of bad, illicit, illegal, immoral behavior can really damage in many different ways the child, the innocent child of such a wicked person. However, here Rabbi Yochanan is saying that even though this woman might have acquired a reputation for being promiscuous and everyone suspects that she might have committed adultery, we don't look at that and say therefore we suspect her child of being a mamzer, unless it is proven that this person is a mamzer, right? That is definitely the product of an adulterous relationship. We will not impose such a presumption on that child. And thank God, right? Thank God. Because it's a terrible thing to be a mamzer in the sense that you're prohibited from marrying other Jews who are not mamzers. So we don't, even though the mother is promiscuous, we don't apply that presumption of being a mamzer to the daughter. Therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, better to marry the daughter than someone who is known to be promiscuous. Now, the Gemara raises an objection to Rabbi Yochanan's statement from a Baraisa. A man may marry a woman who is suspected of promiscuity. And Rava said in response, and how can you understand the Baraisa at face value? The Baraisa states that a man may marry her ab initio, yet clearly it is undesirable to marry someone who is suspected of promiscuity. Rather, the wording of the Baraisa is imprecise, and one should render it like this. If one married a woman suspected of promiscuity, she is permitted to him. Since the Baraisa is imprecise, one should also correct it and teach the daughter of a woman suspected of promiscuity. Right? So, in other words, he's saying that, well, better not to marry someone who is suspected of being promiscuous. But if you did, we're not going to take the fact that, there's gossip about her, that she's suspected, that she secluded herself, whatever the reason is that she's suspected but not proven, of being promiscuous, better not to marry such a person. But if you do marry such a person, you go in with your eyes open, you know what you're doing, and we do not render her prohibited to him. She's permitted to him. And so Rabbi Yochanan would say, Rava would say, and likewise the daughter of one who's promiscuous, we may be better not to marry the daughter of someone who's known to be promiscuous, but if you do, she is permitted for marriage. Now the Gemara concludes, and the law, the halacha, is that it is better that a man marry the daughter of a woman suspected of promiscuity and not marry a woman who herself is suspected of promiscuity, as Rabbi Yochanan said. This ruling is as Rav Tachalifa from the West taught before Rabbi Abahu. If a married woman engages in adulterous sexual intercourse, her children are considered of unflawed lineage. Right? So even though she clearly committed adultery, we know she committed adultery, nonetheless, her children are not dubbed mamzers unless we know they had to be the child of her lovemaking with her paramour, right? Her adulterous lover. Unless we know that the child is the product of the adulterous relationship, we will assume that the child is the child of her father, right? The man married to her mother, right? We don't take a presumptive status, even the child of a woman proven that she committed adultery, unless it's also proven that this child is the product of that adulterous union. We assume that the child is a legitimate child and the child of the man that the woman was married, her mother was married to. Right, that's what Rav Tachalifa said to Rabbi Abahu. Now, Rav Amram raises a dilemma. What is the law if the woman was extremely promiscuous? And one cannot reasonably attribute most instances of intercourse to the husband. Right? Terrible situation, right? Because what Rabbi Tachalifa was saying was that, okay, even if a woman commits adultery, most of the lovemaking she does is with her husband, and so we'll assume that her children are her husband's children. But what if you have a woman, a married woman, who is so promiscuous that you have to assume that most of the instances of sexual relations that she had were with her lovers and not with her husband? Can you still presume that the child is a legitimate child and not the offspring of an adulterous union? That's the question asked by Rav Amram. Now, according to the opinion of the one who says that a woman becomes pregnant only close to the time of the onset of her menstruation, you do not need to raise this dilemma, as the husband does not know the time of this, i.e. the time of her menstruation, in advance, and he does not watch her actions in order to prevent her from conceiving with another man. Her children are therefore of uncertain lineage, right? We cannot assume that they're legitimate. So when do you need to raise this dilemma? It is necessary, according to the opinion of the one who says that a woman becomes pregnant only close to the time of her immersion, right? When is her immersion? So that's about a week after the end of her menses, right? So if a woman has a regular kind of 1 month cycle, and she bleeds for 5 to 7 days, and then she observes 7 clean days, then is when she immerses in the mikveh, and that usually does work out to be about the time of ovulation. So this would be the more correct view. So what is the law, right? So why do you need to raise this dilemma? It is necessary, according to the opinion of the one who says that women become pregnant around the time of their immersion. So what is the law? Can it be assumed that since the husband knows the time of this, i.e. her immersion, and so, in other words, if a husband knows when his wife immerses, I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine that a man is married to a woman who is pious enough to, adhere to the laws of family purity, right? That she would not, that she does not touch her husband, not even hand touching, while she is having her period, and then for 7 days afterward, the 7 clean days that she observed, and then she immerses in the mikveh, and then the husband and wife have a date night. They're permitted to each other for the next 2 weeks of the cycle, so until her period begins again. So these are pious people who conduct themselves this way. So now we're talking about a woman who conducts herself that way, but also is so promiscuous that her husband is watching her like a hawk at the time that she immerses in the mikveh to make sure she doesn't run off and have sex with some other man. This sounds a lot like we're in hypothetical land, but maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe there are people who are hypocrites and are living a life which seems to be a life of purity and holiness, and at the same time conducting themselves, in this incredibly lascivious, licentious way. At any rate, it would seem like if that's how bad she is, in terms of fidelity to the marriage, the husband would be well served to look for a new wife, in my opinion. At any rate, it's probably more like a hypothetical to test our understanding of the law. That's more likely what's going on here. There's no incident being related about such a case. But at any rate, so if the husband suspects his wife is extremely licentious, right, has seen her running around with people, so wouldn't we assume that he knows at the time that she immerses in the mikveh that's when he has to keep an eye on her and make sure that he's the one in her bed and not some other guy, and therefore we can attribute the children of this woman to him, the husband. Do we assume that or do we not? And taiku, the dilemma shall stand unresolved. Now we return to our Mishnah, back to the Sotah ritual. And the Mishnah on page 24a states, and these are the women to whom the court issues a warning in the place of their husbands. One whose husband became a deaf-mute or became an imbecile, or if he were incarcerated in prison, right? How does she become a Sotah? Her husband warns her, do not seclude yourself with that particular man. He says that in front of witnesses, and then two witnesses see her seclude herself with that man she was warned about. That's when she becomes a Sotah. What if the husband is incapable of issuing the warning? Why is he incapable? Either he's in prison, or he's a deaf-mute, or he lacks the mental reasoning to be able to understand the situation and issue the warning. In such a case, the court can issue the warning for him. That's what we learned in our Mishnah. Now about this, the sages taught, the verse states, if the wife of any man goes astray. As the verse could have said, the wife of a man, what is the meaning when the verse states, the wife of any man? So this serves to include the wife of a deaf-mute, and the wife of an imbecile, and the wife of an insane person, and one whose husband went overseas, and one whose husband was incarcerated in prison. And it teaches that the court issues a warning to these women in order to disqualify them from receiving payment of their marriage contract. In other words, the husband was either not in a position to observe that his wife was running around, or not capable of issuing the warning in front of witnesses, but the court observed that she was behaving in this way, and so the court steps in as a kind of legal representative of the husband and issues the warning on the wife's behalf. What is the purpose of a court issuing the warning? Is it to turn her into a Sotah who will go to Jerusalem and drink the bitter water? Maybe, maybe not, as we shall see. But certainly the result of issuing that warning is that if, now that she's a suspected adulteress, and she secludes herself, and the husband and the wife are going to part company, he can issue the divorce and won't have to pay the ketubah payment because she violated that warning. Now, one might have thought that the court's warning is effective even to have the women drink the bitter water, right? She's a full-fledged Sotah who can go down to Jerusalem and drink the bitter water. You might have thought that. Therefore, the verse states, Numbers 5:15, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest, indicating that only the warning issued by the husband causes his wife to drink. The husband has to do the warning, and the husband has to take her to Jerusalem when the temple is standing to have her drink the bitter water. Otherwise, she can't drink the bitter water. So if the court issues the warning, it's not the husband issuing the warning, so she cannot drink the water according to this view. Now the Gemara asks, with what do they disagree? And the Gemara answers, the rabbis hold that we require the same person who issues the warning to bring the woman to the temple. As the verse states, and he warned his wife, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest. But Rabbi Yosef holds that we do not require that the action stated in the verse, and he warned and the man shall bring, be performed by the same person. So according to Rabbi Yosef, the court can issue the warning, and the husband, when he gets out of prison, for example, or returns from overseas, he can take the wife to Jerusalem to have her drink the bitter water. Whereas the majority hold, if the court issued the warning when the husband returns from prison or from trip overseas, he cannot take her to Jerusalem to drink the bitter water because he himself did not issue the warning. New subject. The sages taught that the verse, this is the law of jealousy, when a wife, while under her husband, goes astray and is defiled. Numbers 5:29. So that this whole verse, the sages taught that this whole verse, Numbers 5:29, this is the law of jealousy, when a wife, while under her husband, goes astray and is defiled. This whole verse was unnecessary because this whole section of the Torah has already established that we're talking about a Sotah who was warned, and then she went astray and was defiled. This whole verse is redundant. We could have understood the whole meaning of the Sotah passage without this particular verse in it. So why is it included? The sages are going to learn out a different law from the presence of this verse, Numbers 5:29, namely that the verse serves to compare a man to a woman and a woman to a man. Meaning, The Gemara asks, with regard to what law is this comparison necessary? And Rav Shesha says, this teaches that just as if the husband was blind, he would not have her drink. A blind husband cannot take his wife to Jerusalem to have her drink the bitter water. Why? Because Numbers 5:13 says, and it was hidden from the eyes of her husband, indicating that the Sotah ritual applies only if the husband was capable of, seeing her infidelity, but did not do so, did not keep a close enough eye, whatever reason. He was capable of seeing, but he didn't see. A blind man wasn't capable of seeing, so the Sotah procedure doesn't apply, neither to a blind husband whose wife could become a suspected adulteress, nor to a blind woman who might have run around on her husband. If either one of them is blind, the Sotah procedure doesn't apply to them. And Rav Ashi adds, just as a lame woman and a woman without hands would not drink, because it is written, and the priest shall stand the woman before the Lord and place the meal offering of memorial in her hands. So if she cannot stand, she can't be a Sotah drinking the bitter water. And if she does not have hands, she cannot receive, that meal offering and the service vessel in her hands, and therefore the Sotah ritual doesn't apply to her. Now Bar Rav Ashi says, just as a mute woman would not drink, as it is written, and the woman shall say Amen, Amen. So if she can't say Amen, Amen, this ritual doesn't apply to her, indicating that she must be able to speak. So too, if the husband is a mute who cannot say Amen, Amen, even though he doesn't say Amen, Amen as part of that ritual, but like we say, this verse, number 529, compares the man to the woman and the woman to the man. So if either one of them could not participate physically for some reason in the rituals of the Sotah, neither one, that couple is outside of the Sotah ritual. It doesn't apply to them. And that concludes chapter 4. Now we pass on to chapter 5 here in Tractate Sotah. So very interesting. We've heard before the story of when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who's mentioned in the Passover Haggadah, right? I am as one of 70 years old. Why is he like one of 70 years old? Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah became the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, when he was only 18 years old. And a miracle was performed for him that his hair turned gray overnight so that the other sages would, accord him some respect that they might not otherwise. Why did he become Nasi at such a young age? Because Rabban Gamliel was deposed because of the way that he treated Rabbi Yehoshua. Right? We've heard that story. Eventually, Rabban Gamliel was restored to his post, but since Elazar ben Azariah had already been elevated, and in matters of holiness, we only ascend and do not descend, so then they ended up splitting time. Rabban Gamliel was the Nasi and sort of lectured to the other sages 3 Shabbats every month, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lectured to the other sages as the Nasi, as the head of the Sanhedrin, 1 Shabbos every month. At any rate, when Elazar ben Azariah became the Nasi, and Rabban Gamliel was out for a while until he sort of made amends with Rabbi Yehoshua, and then he was invited back. During this period when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the sole Nasi, they threw open the doors of the study hall, right? Whereas Rabban Gamliel kind of ran the main academy, the principal academy of sages in Israel, as an elite institution where only the brightest of the brightest, the brilliant, most brilliant scholars in the nation were permitted to study there. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, said we're going to be more like a little bit more open doors policy, and anyone who's passionate about learning Torah can learn with us. And you may not become a sage in the end, but he can start the process. And some say they added 400 benches to the study hall that day, and some say they added 700 benches, right? Where each bench, 4, 5, 10 people per bench. So they added an extraordinary number of students. And when they added so many students, they also invited some of the senior sages to teach some halachas that previously had been kept out of the study hall because they weren't deemed authoritative enough. So on that day, there were a bunch of baraisas, right, a bunch of teachings from the oral tradition that were sort of elevated and became, closer to the core of the oral tradition on that day. One of them concerned the Sotah, and now that we've brought in a teaching about the Sotah that was, brought into the study hall on the day that Elazar ben Azariah ascended to the position of Nasi, so now the Mishnah will digress. Even the Mishnah, usually it's the Gemara that digresses, the commentary on the Mishnah, but here even the Mishnah will digress and mention several teachings that were, taught that day, which really have nothing to do with the Sotah, but are being brought in because now that we have allowed some new teachings on that day about the Sotah, we'll mention even in this tractate some of the other new teachings that came into the study hall on that day in history. Okay, so we're on 27b, Mishnah number 1, here in chapter 5 of Tractate Sotah. So, just as the water, the bitter water, evaluates her fidelity, right? If she drinks the bitter water and she's innocent, she has no problem and she'll even bear seed. If she drinks the bitter water and she actually committed adultery, she's going to die. That death might be delayed a bit if she has some merit, or she might die immediately upon drinking the water. What this Mishnah is telling us is that when she drinks that bitter water, if she actually committed adultery, not only will she die, but her lover will die also, and he will die no matter where he is in the world. She might be drinking the bitter water in Jerusalem, and he's across the ocean, in North Africa, across the Mediterranean, who knows where, out in China, wherever he is, he's going to drop dead on the spot because the bitter water evaluates both the Sotah and her lover, right? If she's innocent, no problem for him either. But if she's guilty and she drinks the bitter water, he'll drop dead too. How do we know this? As it is stated, and the water that causes the curse shall enter into her, Numbers 5:24. And then it is stated again at Numbers 5:27, and the water that causes the curse shall enter into her and become bitter. Basically the same idea stated twice. Why is it stated twice? From this it is derived that it is stated the doubly and shall enter is stated twice to teach that both the woman and her paramour are evaluated by the water. Furthermore, prior to her drinking the water, just as she is forbidden to her husband when she becomes a Sotah, when she becomes a suspected adulteress, the husband warns her in front of the witnesses and she secludes herself with the man she was warned about, and witnesses see that. At that moment, the wife and her husband become prohibited to each other. And she, of course, becomes prohibited to the man that she suspected of committing adultery with. She is not allowed to go marry that man. Right? If she divorces her husband, she can't go marry her lover. No. She's prohibited to both of them. Right? Furthermore, prior to drinking the water, just as she is forbidden to her husband, so too she is forbidden to her paramour. Because, in contrast to the verse stating, is defiled, nitma'ah, in Numbers 5:14, a superfluous conjoining prefix vav, which usually means and, is added to a later verse, rendering the phrase, and is defiled, ve'enitma. And the addition of that vav indicates another prohibition, and that is of the woman to her paramour. And this is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Yehoshua said, that was how Zechariah ben Hakatsav would interpret it, i.e., he would also derive from the superfluous vav that the woman is forbidden to her paramour. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says an alternative source. The two times that the defilement of the wife is stated in the passage, namely, and he warns his wife and she is defiled, and later, when a wiping on her husband goes astray and is defiled, indicate that her defilement results in two prohibitions. One is that she is prohibited to her husband, and the other is that she is prohibited to her paramour. On that same day that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed head of the Sanhedrin, right, as I mentioned before, now we're going into a digression, when that law was brought down that we just heard, also Rabbi Akiva interpreted the verse, and every earthen vessel into which any of them falls, whatever is in it shall be impure, yitma, and you shall break it. Right. So now we're talking about the law of tuma and tahara. Right? And specifically, we're talking about when a dead creeping thing falls into an earthenware vessel, especially an earthenware oven. So any other food that was in there or that comes into contact with the earthenware vessel is going to be rendered impure. Can that food then touch other food and render it impure? That kind of derivative impurity. We're not going to go into the weeds on derivative impurity here now. But suffice it to say that on that day that Elazar ben Azariah opened up the study hall, Rabbi Akiva brought in this new teaching. And he says, the verse does not state it is impure, but rather shall be impure. And this is in order to indicate that not only does the vessel itself become ritually impure, but it can now render other items ritually pure. And this teaches with regard to a loaf that has second-degree ritual impurity status, due to its being placed inside an earthenware vessel that had first-degree impurity, because the sharets fell into it, that it can render other food with which it comes into contact impure with third-degree impurity status. Your head is swimming. Here's Rav Steinsaltz's explanation of this. Might help a little. A loaf, right, a loaf of bread that has second-degree impurity. This refers to a loaf that is rendered impure by being placed in an earthenware vessel, such as an oven, which itself has first-degree impurity, because like a dead creeping thing fell into it, okay? Now, Rabbi Akiva states that this loaf of bread, which has second-degree impurity, can impart third-degree impurity to another loaf of bread, even if the other loaf of bread is not sacred. Normally, third-degree impurity refers to impurity imparted by a second-degree impure thing, like the loaf of bread that fell into the impure oven, and then it touched teruma, consecrated food. So it will render the teruma impure such that a priest can now not eat. Teruma can only be eaten by priests. It's food consecrated for the use of priests as part of the tithing process and is given to a priest. Only a priest can eat it, but it can only be eaten in a state of purity. So if teruma, which has to be kept at this high sacred level, comes into contact with that loaf of bread with second-degree impurity, okay, so the teruma is rendered impure and the priest cannot eat it. That's called third-degree impurity. Here, Rabbi Akiva is saying, no, this loaf of bread that fell into the first-degree impure oven can touch regular bread and render it impure. That's a novel ruling. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai seems to take the opposite extreme opinion, as we're about to hear, that a loaf with second-degree impurity cannot transmit impurity even to a loaf of teruma. However, the law is not in accordance with either one of these extreme opinions. An item that has second-degree impurity can transmit impurity to teruma and consecrated food, and thereby disqualifying them from being eaten, but it cannot transmit impurity to non-sacred food. Right? So the new ruling from Rabbi Akiva was this expanded that the second-degree impure loaf can render a regular non-sacred loaf impure through contact, and that would be a kind of third-degree impurity that did not become the law, but Rabbi Akiva said it on that day. After hearing Rabbi Akiva's statement, Rabbi Yehoshua said, "Who will remove the dirt from your eyes, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, who had been dead many years, so that you could live and see this? As you would say, in the future, another generation is destined to deem pure a loaf that contracted third-degree impurity, as there is no explicit verse from the Torah stating that it is impure. But now, Rabbi Akiva, your disciple," and that's wrong. Rabbi Akiva was not Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's disciple, but he was the disciple of Yochanan's disciple, okay? But now, Rabbi Akiva, your disciple, brings a verse from the Torah indicating that it is impure. As it is stated, whatever is in it shall be impure. Right? Rabban Yochanan was said, a generation will come that is so brilliant, they'll figure out why we don't hold this way. But now Rabbi Akiva, the student of Yochanan's student, is saying, no, we do hold that way, and it's because it's written in the Torah if we would interpret it correctly. So furthermore, on that same day, Rabbi Akiva interpreted, but we don't hold like Rabbi Akiva, right? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was maybe correct. So furthermore, on that day, Rabbi Akiva, the day that Elazar ben Azariah opened the study hall, Rabbi Akiva interpreted the verses with regard to the Levite cities as follows. One verse states, now the Levites, who are the Levites? I'm a Levite, right? The Levites are the descendants of Levi, right? The third son of Jacob, right? So Jacob had 12 sons, those are the 12 tribes of Israel. The oldest was Reuben, then came Shimon, then came Levi. right? And Levi is the tribe that included Moses and Aaron. And the Levites served the priests and attended to the tabernacle in the desert. And they were sort of taken as God's special kids, as it were. And so we have, unique obligations and privileges as Levites. We'll get the second Aliyah when we read the Torah on Shabbos, even to this day. But the price for that, and the Levites receive a tithe from the rest of the population, right? When people tithe, they have to give money to the Levites. But that's because the Levites were set aside to attend to sacred things, and therefore they did not receive land, right? They did not receive land at a time when really the only kind of real wealth and real, the normal job that people had was being a farmer. So all of the tribes received portions in the promised land except the Levites. The Levites did not get fields, did not get farms, did not get plots of land, did not get an area for their tribe to live in. So where did they live? They lived in cities. They were the city dwellers. And so there were cities set aside for the Levites. And the Torah specified that how big would the city be? Well, however large the city is, it would have a kind of ring around the city. And now we're going to debate how wide that ring was, 1,000 cubits, 2,000 cubits, 3,000 cubits. And what was it for? Was it just kind of to expand the city so that it would have room to grow? Or was that the place for the fields and vineyards of the people who lived in the city? At any rate, the Torah provided for this additional land around the Levitical cities. How big is that band of land around the Levite city? That's what they're arguing about now. So Rabbi Akiva interpreted the verses with regard to these Levite cities like this. One verse states, "And you shall measure outside the city for the east side 2,000 cubits, and this shall be for them the open land outside the cities." Numbers 35:5. And another verse states at Numbers 35:4, "And the open land around the cities which you shall give to the Levites shall be from the wall of the city and outward 1,000 cubits round about." Now it is impossible to say that the area around the cities given to the Levites was only 1,000 cubits, as it already stated 2,000 cubits. And it is impossible to say that 2,000 cubits were left for them, as it already stated 1,000 cubits. So how do we reconcile these two texts? 1,000 cubits are set aside as a tract of open land surrounding the city, and 2,000 cubits are mentioned not in order to be given to the Levites, but to indicate the boundary of the Shabbos limit, beyond which it is forbidden to travel on Shabbos. The verse thereby serves as the source for the 2,000 cubit Shabbos limit. Now Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, says otherwise. 1,000 cubits were given to the Levites as an open tract of land that could not be planted or built upon, and 2,000 cubits of additional land were given to the Levites for planting fields and vineyards. And additionally, on that same day, another ruling, controversial ruling of Rabbi Akiva, on the day Elazar ben Azariah opened up the study hall, was like this. On that, quote, "Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, saying," right? Right, this is Az Yashir, right? We say this every day in daily prayers. This is the song at the sea. We especially focused on it some weeks ago when it was Passover. So when the children of Israel had crossed through the sea, it was parted for them. They crossed over on dry land. They got to the other side. Pharaoh and his chariots went in. The waters fell down on them and drowned their oppressors, and they never had to be afraid again that Pharaoh and his army would come after them. And then the children of Israel sang this song. All right, so with regard to this song, which is spelled out in the Torah, what does Rabbi Akiva say? Exodus 15:1. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, saying. Right, now you would think it would just be, and then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song, blah, 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 blah. But instead it says that Moses and the children sang this song to the Lord and said, saying. So what are these additional terms, said and saying? What do we learn from that? Says Rabbi Akiva, as there is no need for the verse to state the word saying because it states the word said immediately prior to it, Why must the verse state the word saying? It teaches that the Jewish people would repeat in song after Moses every single statement he said, as is done when we recite Hallel, right? Even now on holidays, we recite Hallel. And there's a kind of, call and response where we repeat the cantor, the Chazan, sings a verse of the Hallel, and then we repeat after him, right? Hodul Hashem, ki tov ki li'olam hasdo, right? Give thanks to the Lord for he is good, his kindness lasts forever. And then we repeat that right after the Chazan. That's the style of Hallel. So according to this, Rabbi Akiva is saying is that the entire Torah, as it was being given to Moses by God, he would recite verses aloud to the Jewish people, and they would repeat it right after him. And that's how the people came to know the Torah in the wilderness, according to Rabbi Akiva. After Moses would recite a verse, they would say as a refrain, not repeating the verse that Moses had just said, but rather kind of like saying Amen, but instead of saying Amen, they would say, I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. And it is for this reason that the word saying is stated in addition to the word said. Moses would say, and you shall love the Lord your God. And then they would say, I will sing to the Lord. And Moses said, and you shall, not boil a kid in its mother's milk. And everyone said, I will sing to the Lord. So I don't know if they were just only saying, I will sing to the Lord, or they were saying, I will sing to the Lord, and then repeating Moses' verse. Now it doesn't say that. What Rabbi Akiva seems to be saying is Moses would say a verse of law, and then they would shout, I will sing to the Lord. Now Rabbi Nehemiah says, the people sang the song together with Moses, as is done when reciting the Shema, which is recited in unison after the prayer leader begins, and not as is done when reciting Hallel. So they were reciting in unison with Moses. Now on that same day, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus taught. So this is yet another law that was issued on the day Elazar ben Azariah opened the study hall. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus taught, and this Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus is only mentioned in this Mishnah in the whole Talmud. Some people think he's Eliezer, the famous Eliezer ben Hyrcanus. It's his younger brother, but there's no proof of that. So we don't know who Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus was, other than this teaching he gives on this Mishnah. So on that day, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus taught, Job, right, the famous Job, served the Holy One, blessed be he, only out of love, as it is stated. Remember, Job is the poor fellow who was prospering, doing very well in this world, and was absolutely devoted to God. And then the Satan, the accuser, right, comes to God and says, well, I think maybe God even said, look at my servant Job, he's so loyal. And the Satan says, well, he's only loyal because he's rich and happy, has lots of kids. He's leading a happy life that you blessed him with. If you were to take away all these sources of joy, do you think he'd be still so loyal to you, the Lord his God? And God said, well, test him, And so they took everything away from Job. All his family died. He broke out in disease. He lost all his business. Just everything fell apart for him. But he did not turn away from God. So, says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus, why was Job so attached to God? Because he genuinely loved God. He served God out of love. As it is stated, Job 13:15, says Job, though he will slay me, still I will trust in him. And still the matter is even, meaning the verse is ambiguous, as there are two possible interpretations of the verse. Was Job saying, though he will slay me, I will await him, expressing his yearning for God? Or should the verse be interpreted as saying, though he will slay me, I will not await him? How can we interpret it both ways? How's that possible? Because the word lo, I will await him, but the word lo can mean either him or no in Hebrew. So it could you could translate it either way. Though he slay me, I should await for him. Or though he slay me, I will await for him, right? Meaning he loves God and he trusts God, or he's just afraid of God. These are the two ways to interpret it. And so the dilemma is resolved elsewhere, where the verse states a clear indication of Job's intent. Job 27:5, till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. And this teaches, according to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus, that Job acted out of love. And I'm almost done, so if questions or comments, get them in now. Rabbi Yehoshua said, who will remove the dirt from your eyes, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who had been dead for a number of years, so that you could live and see this? As you taught all your life that Job worshipped the omnipresent only out of fear, as it is stated, and that man was wholehearted and upright and God-fearing and shunned evil. But now Yehoshua ben Hyrcanus, the disciple of your disciple, has taught that Job acted out of love. So which is it? Did Job act out of love? Right? In other words, he maintained faith in God because he loved God so much. Or did he act out of fear? He maintained faith in God because he thought he would be punished even more if he didn't. Which do you think it is? That's the end of our Mishnah. We'll get into the discussion of this Mishnah, God willing, tomorrow at the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. All right, let me scan the comments. Nina has her book club tonight, so she is unable to pass me questions through our Google Doc as she normally would. I'm pretty sure. I don't think her book club is over yet. So I am scanning. Give me a moment. David Rupis says, go to Numbers chapter 1. It lists the name of the 12 tribes, including the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. It did not list the tribe of Levi, which would be 13 tribes. Could I be wrong? No. It's a great point that you're making, David. Who were Ephraim and Manasseh? They were the sons of Joseph. Why are they counted as tribes among the tribes who were descended from the 12 sons of Jacob? Because Jacob himself, when he came to Egypt, right, Joseph went ahead, was sold into slavery, and ended up, getting out of jail and becoming the viceroy of Egypt, the second most powerful man in the world. And then when the brothers needed to buy food, they went to Egypt, and they ended up all moving to Egypt. That's the whole story of Joseph and his brothers. When Jacob finally came to Egypt, he was very excited to meet Joseph's sons, right? Jacob had despaired of ever seeing Joseph alive. He thought Joseph was dead. And now not only did he see Joseph again, but he also met his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who had been born in Egypt, but maintained their Jewish identity. And so Jacob blessed the lads, Ephraim and Manasseh. In fact, we bless our sons on Friday nights, that you should be like Ephraim and Manasseh, right? These are the first two brothers in the Bible that were not fighting with each other. We're not mean to each other. We're a team and work well, and we're in harmony, at peace with each other. That's why we bless them that way. But at any rate, Jacob promoted Ephraim and Manasseh, who were his grandchildren, to be like his children. And that's why they're considered tribes who received an inheritance in the promised land. So there is a region of Israel called Ephraim and another region called Manasseh. Did the Levites not get a region? Correct. They didn't get a region because the Levites, who were one of the 12 tribes, had been promoted to be sort of attendants to the holy and had responsibilities for the welfare of the holiness of the people. And so they would live in the cities and attend to business and matters of holiness. And Levites also served in the temple, although not not doing the jobs that only priests can do. But Levites were assistants to the priest in the holy temple. And that is why it's seemingly 13 tribes. But no, because the Levites were promoted, they still maintain the number 12 because Ephraim and Manasseh were promoted from grandchildren to children of Jacob, as it were. And I think maybe Sharon was answering that question too. Sharon asked, just showed up on Facebook, right? I explained at the beginning of the class that I apologize to everybody for starting the class late tonight because our son had his final baseball game and they had a ceremony for the seniors who are graduating. He and his co-captains of the baseball team. I wasn't going to miss that. And I'm sorry about the late notice because so many games were rained out in California this year. The school kind of scrambled to put this event together a little bit last minute. So I apologize for the late notice that we started an hour late, but it was a family matter and that's what it was. So please forgive me. I think that's all the questions that I am seeing. So it's great to be learning with you on a Thursday, and God willing, we'll be learning together tomorrow, Friday at noon Pacific. Have a great night and a good Erev Shabbos.